I knew something was wrong the moment my dad wouldn't look at me across the dinner table. The roast chicken was still steaming, the glasses still full, yet the air felt cold enough to crack. Then he said it calmly, casually, like he'd been waiting years for the moment. "Harper, you're not half the woman your sister is." The words didn't just sting, they split something open inside me. Jane's fork paused midair, and a tiny, satisfied smile curled at the corner of her lips. Of course she enjoyed it. She always did. For 28 years, I swallowed every comparison, every dismissal, every time I was told to keep the peace. But not this time. I set my fork down. My hands were steady in a way my heartbeat wasn't. Then I pushed my chair back, the sound slicing the room in half, and said, "Then she can start paying your rent." Silence. Absolute devastating silence. People think family pain comes from big betrayals, shouting, slammed doors, dramatic exits. Mine came quietly. A comment here, a comparison there, small enough to ignore but sharp enough to cut. And over 28 years, the cuts added up. Growing up, my sister Jane was the sun in our house. And me? I was expected to orbit around her. She was the gifted one. Straight A student, homecoming queen, law school scholarship, the daughter people pointed at proudly in grocery stores. My parents treated her wins like community events. Every trophy went on the living room shelf. Every accomplishment was told and retold like a family legend. Meanwhile, I learned to make myself small. Not because I lacked ambition, but because in this house, space already belonged to someone else. When I got into a good college, Dad said, "That's great, sweetheart. But Jane could have gone Ivy if she wanted." When I got my first promotion, Mom smiled politely and said, "Jane got 2 raises her first year." When I moved into my own apartment, decorated it, paid for everything myself, they said, "Cute place. Jane's is bigger." I spent years telling myself it didn't bother me. That being the quiet one made me stable, grounded, less dramatic. But the truth? Silence was survival. It kept the peace. It kept me from screaming. And yet, like clockwork, every Friday, I still drove back to the house I grew up in. A 2-story colonial with white shutters and a porch swing that looked charming to strangers and suffocating to me. I told myself it mattered showing up. I wanted to believe no amount of favoritism could erase the fact that I was still part of this family. But every time I crossed the threshold, I felt 16 again. Not Harper, the woman who handled multi-million-dollar accounts at her company. No Harper. The daughter who never measured up to the daughter they worshipped. Mom would fuss over Jane's hair, her new outfits, the latest praise she'd gotten at work. Dad would ask Jane for advice on everything, mortgages, taxes, investments, despite the fact that I was literally the one who worked in finance. And me? I set the table. I passed the salt. I filled the silence. There was a script in that house, one they'd been reciting for decades. Jane the hero. Jane the savior. Jane the perfect daughter. And I was the footnote nobody bothered to read. But that night, the night Dad told me I wasn't half the woman Jane was, something shifted. For the first time, I didn't shrink. I didn't swallow it. I didn't force myself to be the quiet, obedient version of Harper they preferred. That night, for the first time in my life, I let myself break their script. People say secrets destroy families, but sometimes, it's not the secret itself, it's the silence wrapped around it. 3 years ago, my parents were drowning. I still remember the phone call. Mom's voice trembling, Dad's breathing uneven. They tried to sound calm, but parents who have everything together don't call their daughter at 11 p.m., asking if she's busy. They told me they were managing some unexpected financial tightness, but when I checked their mortgage account because I'm in finance, and I can read numbers the way other people read faces, I saw the truth. They were months behind. One more missed payment and they'd lose the house. Not the house they lived in. The house I grew up in. The house whose hallway still had height marks from when I was little. The house with the window seat Mom always said she'd designed just for you, Harper, even though Jane used it more. I drove to their place at midnight. They were sitting at the dining table, papers everywhere. Bank statements crumpled like bad memories. Dad looked older than I'd ever seen him. Mom kept rubbing her palms like she was trying to wipe away worry. "Don't tell Jane," Mom said before I even opened my mouth. "She has so much on her plate. We don't want her thinking we're struggling." Struggling. The word echoed. Jane was the golden child, their pride. I was the one they called when life stopped being shiny. I didn't hesitate. I paid the overdue amount that night. I set up automatic monthly payments the next morning. I told myself it was temporary. Just until Dad got that consulting gig. Just until Mom picked up more hours. Just until things stabilized. But months turned into a year, then 2, then 3. 3 years of waking up every 15th and seeing money leave my account before I could even drink my morning coffee. 3 years of saying no to vacations, to courses I wanted to take, to upgrading my own apartment. 3 years of listening to Mom brag about how Jane helped us sort out some paperwork so sharp. That girl. Paperwork, right. Every time I thought about telling the truth, Dad would place a hand on my shoulder and say, "Thank you, sweetheart. You don't know how much this means. Just don't make a big deal out of it. Just don't make a big deal." As if 3 years of paying for a house I didn't live in was nothing. As if my sacrifices were invisible by design. But I stayed quiet. Because I didn't want applause. I wanted my parents to feel safe. And yet, during those 3 years, I watched them praise Jane for buying a new car, for taking trips to Miami, for being so responsible with money while I ate noodles at my desk because I was too scared to check my bank balance. The worst part? They weren't cruel about it. They were oblivious. Utterly, painfully oblivious. They didn't notice I was tired. They didn't notice my stress. They didn't notice me. Until the night Dad told me I wasn't half the woman my sister was. He had no idea he was talking to the woman who'd saved the roof over his head for nearly 1,100 days. And that was the moment something inside me snapped, not from anger, but from revelation. They didn't just take my help for granted. They took me for granted. By the time the Friday dinner rolled around, I already felt the shift, small, subtle, but unmistakable. You don't grow up in a house built on comparisons without learning how to read tension the way some people read weather. The minute I stepped onto the porch, I knew something was off. Mom opened the door too quickly, like she'd been standing behind it. Dad adjusted his collar 3 times in the span of 5 seconds. And Jane, who usually arrived fashionably late, was already seated at the table, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine photo shoot. Her smile was wrong. Not smug, not triumphant. Something else. Like she'd already won a game I didn't know I was playing. "Harper, you're early," Mom said, voice high-pitched in that, "I'm hiding something way." "I'm on time," I replied. "Oh, right." She forced a laugh that didn't fit her face. I walked past them into the dining room. The table was set, 2 nicely cloth napkins, candles, wine that Dad only opened on holidays. For a Friday dinner? Suspicious. Dad cleared his throat again. A nervous tic he had whenever he needed to prepare people for something. A speech, a revelation, a decision. Whatever it was, I wasn't going to like it. Jane looked up from her phone and said sweetly, "Big night for the family, huh?" I stared at her. "What's happening tonight?" She shrugged. "You'll see." That tone, condescending, practiced, it made something crawl under my skin. We sat down. Mom served roasted chicken like always, but her hands shook. Dad kept glancing at Jane like she was on stage and he was her proud manager. Jane flipped her hair and smiled like she was waiting for applause. Conversation started with their usual routine. "Mom." Jane was selected to lead the firm's arbitration team. "Dad." "Your sister's really making a name for herself." Jane. "Well, they know talent when they see it." I cut a piece of chicken. Chewed. Swallowed. I had just finished a brutal quarter-end project at work, cleaning financial chaos left by a former manager, and received personal praise from the director. But mentioning my accomplishments at this table always triggered the same response. "That's great, Harper, but Jane." So I didn't bother bringing it up. Then Dad leaned back, clasps his hands, sighs dramatically and says, "Speaking of responsibility, Jane helped us sort out the mortgage situation. We don't know what we'd do without her." My heart dropped. Mortgage situation. Jane. Helped. Helped how? By existing? I set my fork down. Mom nodded eagerly. "She's been such a blessing. Really stepped up for us." A slow heat rose in my chest. Not anger, clarity. Jane lifted her wine glass and said lightly, "Well, I do what I can. Someone has to look out for this family." It was rehearsed. They had practiced this. They had built this narrative brick by brick with Jane as the hero, and me as nothing more than a background character. I felt something shift inside me, an internal tilt, like gravity rearranging itself. They weren't just rewriting the story. They were erasing mine. I looked at Dad. His eyes were glowing with pride for the wrong daughter. Over the wrong story, built on the wrong truth. And in that moment, I knew. Tonight, something very, very ugly was coming. Dad let out a long breath, the kind that meant he was preparing to say something important. He looked at Jane, then at Mom, then finally at me. "Harper," he said, adjusting his glasses the way he always did before delivering a judgment. "Your sister has always had a natural gift for leadership. She stepped in during a difficult time, and we're grateful." Stepped in? I stared at him, my pulse pounding like drums against my ribs. Mom chimed in. "She really saved us with that mortgage paperwork. You know how complicated those things are." Something snapped inside me, small but sharp. Paperwork? That was their heroic version of events? 3 years of my savings, my life reduced to a single word? Jane tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, pretending to be humble. "I mean, I didn't do much. But you guys know I'm always here for the family." Her voice was honey-coated poison. Dad, seemingly inspired by his own delusion, added with a proud smile. "She's just always been exceptional, Harper. You can't compare. You're not, well," he hesitated, searching for a soft landing he never intended to use. "You're not half the woman your sister is." My brain went silent. Completely, utterly silent. The room didn't tilt, I did. Not because I believed him, but because I finally realized something. They would rather worship a lie wrapped in Jane's smile than face the truth wrapped in my sacrifice. Jane's lips curled into the faintest smile. Victorious, satisfied. She knew. She knew exactly what she was doing. I placed my fork down gently, intentionally. My hands were steady, but my voice came from a place inside me I had never allowed to speak before. I pushed my chair back, the screech cutting through the illusion of a perfect family like a blade. "Well," I said, standing up, "if Jane is such an exceptional woman," I met my father's eyes, unblinking, "then she can start paying your rent." The world froze. Mom blinked. Dad's mouth fell open. Jane dropped her fork. "Our rent?" Mom stammered. "What rent?" Dad's voice cracked. "Harper, what are you talking about?" I leaned forward, palms on the table, feeling the weight of 3 years of silence finally lifting. "The mortgage payments," I said, each word landing like a hammer. "The past 36 months. The house you're sitting in. The home you're so proud Jane saved with her paperwork." Their faces changed in real time. Confusion, disbelief, fear, denial. Mom shook her head so fast it looked rehearsed. "That's not true. You must be mistaken." "Mom," I said quietly, "I have the bank statements." Dad swallowed hard. "You shouldn't bring that up now. It's not appropriate." There it was. The lifelong strategy. Minimize me, silence me, shove the truth into the shadows where they preferred I stay. But I was done being appropriate. "What's inappropriate?" I said, straightening up. "Is pretending Jane saved something I paid for." Jane finally spoke, voice trembling slightly. Harper, maybe you misunderstood. Maybe Mom didn't mean." But I wasn't listening to her anymore, because for the first time in my life, I saw all three of them clearly. Not as the family I wished I had, but as the people who benefited from my silence. And in that blinding clarity, I realized something else. I wasn't going to stay silent ever again. The silence after my words wasn't peaceful. It was sharp, electric. The kind that follows a truth so heavy it bends the room around it. Dad stared at the table like the wood grain suddenly mattered more than everything I'd just said. Mom pressed a hand to her chest, her breathing uneven, as if honesty itself was an attack. And Jane looked terrified, not guilty, not sorry, just terrified that her throne was cracking beneath her. "I'm done," I whispered. "It wasn't meant for them. It was meant for me." I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. Mom lurched forward slightly. "Harper, sit down. You're being dramatic." I laughed quiet, bitter. 3 years of paying your mortgage and I'm dramatic? Dad finally looked up, panic flickering in his eyes. "Where are you going?" "Away," I said. Just one word, but it carried the weight of everything I had swallowed for nearly 3 decades. I walked toward the door. No one stopped me. Not because they respected my choice, but because they didn't understand it. They'd never seen me walk away from conflict before. To them, silence was my role. Obedience was my script. But I wasn't their quiet daughter anymore. The cold night air hit me like truth, sharp, bracing, real. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting the wind clear my head, then finally breathed for the first time that evening. When I got home, I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was done. I poured myself a glass of water, opened my laptop, logged into my banking app, and hovered over the automatic payment that left my account every 15th for the last 36 months. There it was. Mortgage. $2,147.82. Scheduled every month. A reminder of every sacrifice no one ever asked about, yet everyone benefited from. A small box popped up when I clicked Cancel Payment. Are you sure? For the first time in years, I didn't hesitate. I pressed yes, and just like that, I felt something inside me uncoil. Not relief. Not revenge. Freedom. Over the next few weeks, I rebuilt pieces of myself I didn't even know were broken. I started running along the waterfront before work. I joined a Tuesday night pottery class where the instructor called me quiet but steady, and for once, it didn't feel like an insult. I went out to brunch with friends I'd slowly drifted from because I was always helping family. I even picked up a certification course my job had encouraged me to take years ago. And with every small step forward, I kept noticing something. My life felt bigger when I wasn't shrinking myself for them. Cutting off the mortgage payment wasn't an act of spite. It was a declaration. I refused to disappear to make others comfortable. I didn't realize it then, but leaving that dinner wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Because soon after, the world my parents tried so hard to curate would come crashing down, and they'd learn the truth they'd ignored for decades. Harper Bennett was no longer invisible. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of silence from my parents, which should have felt strange but didn't. Silence had always been the safest language between us. But the peace didn't last. One Sunday morning, as I was making coffee, my phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Green, our longtime neighbor. She's the type who notices everything. Which cars visit, which lights stay on late, which families are arguing even when windows are closed. Her text read, "Harper, you should see this. I thought you'd want to know." Attached was a photo. My heart stalled. There, hanging across my parents' porch, my childhood porch, was a giant white banner. "Congratulations, Jane, for saving the family home." The letters were in gold. Gold, as if she had performed some miracle. I stared at the screen, waiting for anger, but none came. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity. They were rewriting the story even worse than before. Not only erasing me, but handing my sacrifice to Jane like a trophy. I sat down, placed the coffee mug on the table and whispered, "Enough." Something changed inside me that exact second. Not rage, conviction. If they wanted a public narrative, I'd give them a public truth. That night, I pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in years, printed statements, receipts, payment confirmations, 36 months lined up in cold, neat rows. Numbers don't lie, people do. But the real turning point came the next day when I got a call from my old friend, Charlotte. "Harper," she said softly, "I don't know how to tell you this, but your parents asked me to help with a slideshow for their family appreciation dinner. I'm stated." My stomach tightened. "Let me guess," I said. "It's about Jane." Charlotte hesitated. "It's worse. They want to honor her for keeping the home. They sent me captions. They're calling her the anchor of the family. Anchor, hero, savior. Words they had never used for me. "Can you send me the file?" I asked. "Harper, are you sure that's a good idea?" "I'm very sure." A few minutes later, I opened the slideshow. And there she was. Jane on the porch. Jane holding papers. Jane hugging our parents. Jane smiling like she'd conquered the world. Slide after slide after slide. A mythology built on a lie. I exhaled slowly, the breath shaking but steady enough to keep me upright. Then I opened a duplicate copy of the file, and I added what they erased. A timeline of every payment I made. Screenshots of monthly bank withdrawals. Blurred text messages from Dad that still read clearly enough. "Harper, help us just this once." A chart showing 3 years of mortgage totals. The final slide. Truth deserves a place too. I saved the file. Not once, not twice, but to my laptop, my cloud drive, and a small USB I slipped into my purse. My hands were calm, almost unnervingly so. For 3 years I kept their secret to protect them. Now I was protecting myself. And as the date of the family appreciation dinner approached, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Because for the first time ever, I wasn't walking into their story. They were walking into mine. The restaurant was too beautiful for the kind of truth about to spill inside it. Crystal chandeliers, gold trimming, soft piano music dripping from the speakers like honey. It looked like a place where families celebrated weddings or graduations, not where decades of buried truth came to die. I stood outside the private event room, hand resting on the cold silver handle, watching through the glass like someone observing their own life from afar. My parents were inside, seated at a long table draped in white linen. Mom wore pearls, Dad a navy blazer. Both looked proud, radiantly proud of Jane, who stood in the center greeting relatives like a celebrity on a red carpet. Laughter, hugs, compliments being tossed in the air like confetti. A celebration, a lie wrapped in celebration. I inhaled deeply and stepped inside. The room quieted, then murmurs rose like static. Is that Harper? She actually came. I didn't think she'd show. Jane's smile tightened. Mom's shoulders stiffened. Dad's face shifted through three expressions: surprise, panic, irritation, before landing on something he thought looked welcoming. Harper, he said, walking toward me quickly. You made it. I offered him a soft, impossibly calm smile. Of course. Wouldn't miss it. But I saw it the way his eyes flicked nervously toward the screen at the front of the room. He didn't want me there. Not tonight. Not when the fairy tale was finally about to be presented. The dinner began. Everyone finished their plates. Then Dad stood, tapping his glass. Thank you all for being here, he announced proudly. Tonight we honor our daughter, Jane Bennett, whose dedication and strength helped us keep our family home during a very difficult time. I missed of the tam. In the stared what is not with hand help in Bertie. Applause filled the room. My chest tightened. Not with jealousy, with awe, at how easily they lied to themselves. The lights dimmed. The slideshow began. Photo after photo of Jane. Jane smiling on the porch. Jane holding documents. Jane standing between our parents like some chosen protector. Captions read, our hero. Our anchor. Our strength. The daughter who saved our home. My relatives. Awed. Some clapped softly. My aunt wiped away tears. Then, the screen glitched. A brief flicker. A freeze. A sudden black frame. Dad frowned at the technician. Mom shifted uncomfortably. Jane tilted her head, confused. Then my slides appeared. A bar graph. Clear. Unmistakable. Payment after payment after payment. Another slide. Mortgage receipt. Paid by Harper Bennett. 36 entries. A timeline in stark black and white. Another slide. Blurry text from Dad. Harper, we need help again this month. Please don't tell Jane. She's under a lot of stress at work. Just this once. Gasps erupted around the room. Someone whispered loudly, "Oh my God." My mother shot out of her chair. "Turn that off. This isn't part of the program." But I was already walking forward. Dad stepped toward me, voice tight. "Harper, stop this. We can discuss it privately." I looked at him steadily. "Why? You wanted everyone here to know what Jane did." I gestured toward the screen. "They should know what I did too." Jane stood frozen, pale, shaking. "Harper, why would you do this? Why embarrass me?" "Embarrass you?" I repeated softly. "No, Jane. This is called truth. Something you and Mom and Dad forgot how to use. I didn't fight me ears of video." My aunt spoke cautiously. "So, Harper was the one who paid the mortgage?" I turned to the room. "Yes. Every month. For 3 years. Quietly. Consistently. While the daughter you're celebrating tonight filed a few papers and took the credit." The whispers grew louder. Mom's voice cracked, desperate. "We didn't want to make you feel bad, Harper. Jane is she's sensitive. She was going through so much. And I wasn't?" My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It sliced through the room like glass. Dad ran a hand through his hair. "Harper, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time." I walked to the front, took the small remote from the tech's trembling hand, and clicked to the final slide. A photo of the house. My childhood home. And beneath it, the words, "The truth deserves a place too." Silence. Then Jane broke. "You always wanted to be the victim," she snapped. "You couldn't stand being second, could you?" I blinked at her slowly. "Jane, I didn't want to be first. I just wanted to exist." Her mouth opened. No sound came out. I stepped closer. Not threatening, not dramatic, just undeniably present. For my entire life, I said. I let you all write a story where I was the quiet one, the lesser one, the invisible one. I paid for a home I didn't live in. I sacrificed opportunities you never knew about. And you repaid me with erasure. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Harper, please. I'm not angry anymore, I said truthfully. I'm awake. Dad reached out a hand. Sweetheart, wait. But I stepped back. No. Tonight I'm done waiting. Done shrinking. Done disappearing. I feel in the stains. Maving is fording the stain. The entire room watched as I set the remote down, smoothed my dress, and turned toward the exit. My voice was calm, steady, final. If the truth makes anyone uncomfortable, that's not my problem. And I walked out. Not a single person followed me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't alone. I was free. 2 days passed after the dinner. 2 quiet, oddly peaceful days. The kind of peace that comes when a storm has finally ripped through everything that was already broken. I spent the morning watering the small plants on my balcony, something I had never done consistently until recently. My apartment felt different now. Bigger, brighter, like a space that finally belonged to me, not to the version of myself my family preferred. Around lunchtime, someone knocked on my door. 3 soft knocks, a pause, then one more. I knew that pattern. My father always knocked like that, unsure, hesitant, like he wanted to give you enough time to pretend not to be home. I opened the door. Mom and Dad stood there, close together, looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. Mom's eyes were red. Dad's shoulders sagged like the years had finally caught up to him. No, Jane. Of course not. Harper, Mom whispered, stepping inside as if afraid I might slam the door. We needed to see you. I nodded, wordless, letting them in. They looked around my apartment like it was foreign territory, as if they were seeing my life for the first time. Dad's voice shook. We're sorry, Harper. The words hung in the air, shockingly fragile. Mom wiped her eyes. We failed you. We didn't see how much you were doing, how much you were carrying. We let the story become something it never should have been. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. Just calm. Why now? I asked softly. Dad exhaled, a long, deflated breath. Because, after you left, people started asking questions. Real questions. We couldn't keep pretending. And when we looked at those slides afterward, he rubbed his forehead. We realized how blind we'd been. Mom reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. But I didn't close my fingers around hers either. We talked, she said shakily. Your father and I want to put your name on the house. It belongs to you. You earned it. I looked at them, really looked at them. For years, I would have given anything to hear those words. But not anymore. Mom, I said gently. I don't want the house. She blinked, startled. You don't? I shook my head. I have a home now, one I built myself. What I needed wasn't property. It was honesty, respect, acknowledgement. Dad swallowed hard. That's fair. We stood in silence for a long moment. Not awkward silence like the past, but something softer, unfamiliar, maybe even hopeful. Then I said what had been true for years but only now felt safe to say. If we rebuild anything from here, it has to start without lies. Without pretending. Without making me disappear. Mom nodded quickly, tears returning. Yes, we want that. Truly. Dad looked at me with something I hadn't seen since childhood. Not pride, not disappointment, but understanding. When they left, the apartment felt even brighter than before. Sunlight filled the living room. I stood on my balcony, letting the cool breeze hit my skin, breathing deeply. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in Jane's shadow. I wasn't fighting to be seen. I wasn't trying to win their approval. I was simply Harper Bennett. Whole, steady, unafraid. And for the first time, that was enough. Standing on that balcony, watching the city lights flicker across the skyline, I realized something I'd spent years avoiding. Silence doesn't protect you. It only erases you piece by piece, moment by moment, until you barely recognize the person reflecting back at you. For most of my life, I thought keeping the peace meant keeping quiet. I convinced myself that if I didn't speak up, if I made myself small enough, soft enough, accommodating enough, my family would finally see me. But that's not how respect works. And it's not how love works either. The truth didn't break my family. It broke the illusion that was keeping us stuck. And in the space that truth created, something new began to grow. Boundaries, honesty, air to breathe. A chance to build connections rooted in who I actually am, not who I was expected to be. So, if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever carried a burden in silence, if your story has been rewritten without your permission, let me tell you this. You are allowed to stand up. You are allowed to speak. You are allowed to take up space in your own life. And when you finally step out of the shadows, no matter how long you've been in them, the world doesn't end. Your life finally begins. If this chapter resonated with you, tell me your story in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this about finding your voice, healing, and choosing yourself, hit subscribe. Your voice matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.